Hello, everyone. I'm sorry there was just a short delay there as I was trying to go live, but I hope that you are here and ready to have some conversation about what we've been talking about this morning, especially, but over this whole series of the Book of Matthew. My name is Pastor Chris. As Paul said, if you're new to us and you're maybe joining this morning, I'm one of the pastors on staff at Compass Point, and just really happy to spend a bit of time together with you this morning. Hi, Colton. Glad that you're back with us. Alex, good to see you this morning. Just wondering, as you're enjoying this summer weather, what kind of things you're doing over the course of the weekend. What have you got planned for this afternoon? Hey, Rachel, nice to see you. Simona, good to have you back again. Maybe you've got some exciting plans for the rest of your weekend time or some things you've been doing this weekend already. Or maybe you have some thoughts on this series. I'd love to hear some of the questions or the particular challenges that you have been challenged with as we've been talking through this series, Kingdom Come, and walking through the book of Matthew. Hey, Dean, good to see you. Julie, wonderful to see you. Yes, Ben and Hannah. Ben, one of our staff, was married yesterday, and I had the great privilege of officiating that wedding. Ben and Hannah are a tremendous couple, and we are really celebrating with them. So thanks, Julie, for reminding us to cheer and celebrate with those guys this morning. Lennox and Gail and Sebastian, if you're there, just great to see you guys. Hey, Rachel Collins. Lots of others just saying good morning this morning. So thank you so much for joining us. Good to see you. What are you doing this weekend? What kind of things do you have going on? Also, what are some of your learnings or things you've been challenged with over this Matthew series? I'd love to hear a little bit more about those things in the comments. Hey, Lori, thanks for joining us. I know for me, I'm getting to have a physically distant visit today with someone that I haven't seen in a really, really long time. And so I'm looking forward to doing that this afternoon. I'm not sure if others of you have had opportunities like that lately. Going to Emerald Lake, all right, and movie nights at home with friends. That sounds good. Oh, the Campbells are kidless this weekend. So they're having the time of their lives. That's fantastic. I hope that you and Cal are enjoying a little bit of a quieter household. Good job. Rachel's thinking about going out and exercising. Yeah, it's really hot for exercising. That's the main reason I choose not to do a lot of exercise. It's because of the heat, for sure. That's at least that's what I tell myself. Good to see you, Don and Wendy. Hey, Kristen, and any of the youth and young adults that are watching. Just really glad to have you on board. So again, just if you got something that's happening this weekend, you want to tell us about it, or maybe if you have a question or a particular thought or challenge from this Matthew series, would love to hear about that. Stu, good to see you guys. Hi to your family. Wonderful to have you on board. As Paul's been talking this morning about this commissioning of the disciples, I can't help but think of one of the most famous movie franchises that has ever happened on the planet. No pun intended with planet. It's a movie franchise that there's a lot of big fans of. And so you might know, you could probably guess it even before I say it. There's a lot of movies in this franchise, some of which are a little on the older side and some of which are very much on the newer side. But I think of the franchise Star Wars. And so I don't know how many of you are Star Wars fans and how many of you are Star Wars haters. It seems to divide people up a little bit. But I think of this idea of kind of the learner and the teacher. And so in Star Wars, all throughout those movies, we see that there's someone who has the power of the Force and they have this great understanding of the universe. And then they pass on that learning to their Padawan, to their apprentice. And so we see it with Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin. And of course with Luke Skywalker, and then even in the modern franchise, we see it with Rey. I see some of you are fans of Star Wars. You can continue to debate the quality of Star Wars in the comments if you want to, but I think about that. And so that reminded me of something that I thought would be a great short quiz for us this morning. Dave kind of did something very similar last time with his Taylor Swift versus Lamentations quiz. But I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. I'll read a line, and I just want you to tell me if it's Star Wars or if it's scripture, okay? It should be really easy, especially if you know Star Wars or if you know scripture. So just no problem at all here. I'll ask you a couple, and you just guess Star Wars or scripture. So the first one is this. I heard a cry of terror, a cry of fear, and not of peace. I heard a cry of terror, a cry of fear, and not of peace. So just tell me, do you think that was Star Wars or do you think that is scripture? Julie's already nervous that she's not going to do very well. Julie, have you seen all of the Star Wars movies? I think there's 9 main ones and then like 2 additional ones. So there's a lot going on. So we got a few people guessing Star Wars. I heard a cry of terror, a cry of fear, and not of peace. Paul says scripture. He's the pastor. Should we touch him? Rachel, should we trust him? Rachel Severn says scripture. Julie Campbell says a strong no to Star Wars. So we've got a mix here. Virginia saying scripture. Simona scripture. Kristen Star Wars. The answer is scripture. Jeremiah 30 verse 5. All right, next one. Who's the more foolish? The fool or the fool who follows him? Star Wars or scripture? Who's the more foolish? The fool or the fool who follows him? So Julie says whatever Paul says. Well, he was right that time, but I'm not sure that he'll get all of these right, even though he's a fan of both scripture and Star Wars. So we will find out. Who's the more foolish? The fool or the fool who follows him? Star Wars or scripture? Give it your best guess. Okay, Don and Wendy say scripture. Oh, no, say Star Wars, sorry. Lots of Star Wars. People guessing Star Wars. Great. Ooh, Rachel says Star Wars. Paul says Star Wars. Okay, we'll see if Paul can keep it alive. It's Star Wars. Obi-Wan Kenobi says this. In A New Hope, he says that. Who's the more foolish, the fool or the fool who follows him? I love that. I got to remember that line because it's a great line. Okay, here's another one. Let me see here. Here's one I think many of you will get. Your thoughts betray you. Your thoughts betray you. Is that Star Wars or scripture? Julie, is that kind of your blanket guess? Yoda? Is that going to be for everything? Your thoughts betray you. Star Wars or scripture? What do you think? Okay, someone says scripture. Someone says Star Wars. You guys are doing a great job, by the way. A few more guesses. Lori says scripture. Colton, Star Wars. Dean, Star Wars. The answer is definitely Star Wars. That's right. So this is a pretty famous line from the movie franchise. Your thoughts betray you. There's some similar themes for sure in scripture. So if you guessed scripture, you're probably not too far off because I think you could find something like this. Good job on that. Okay, so let's do this. An apprentice doesn't lecture the master. An apprentice doesn't lecture the master. Star Wars or scripture? What do you think? An apprentice doesn't lecture the master. What do you think? The apprentice doesn't lecture the master. Sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? I mean, I think we know this phrase. It's just a matter of where it's from. Okay, we got people chiming in. Scripture, scripture, Star Wars, Star Wars, scripture, scripture, scripture. All right, the answer is scripture. Okay, Luke chapter 6, verse 40. And we see some of this same theme in the passage today that Paul preached on. So that might have helped you out a little bit. Okay, let's do 2 more really quick, and then we're going to move on. Be mindful of your feelings. Be mindful of your feelings. Is that from Star Wars or is that from scripture? It's good advice, to know your feelings, know if they're controlling you. We talked a little bit about this at the wedding yesterday, that love is something that we often attribute with emotions and feelings, but it's so much more than that. There's an action to love. And we were looking at some great research around how if you want to feel more loving towards someone, you actually have to begin to act more loving towards them, and your feelings catch up. And it's something that scientists have been studying for the last 30, 40 years around love and feelings and emotions. So be mindful of your feelings. So we've got a whole bunch of guesses here. Star Wars, Yoda, Star Wars, scripture, Star Wars, and it is from Star Wars. So Paul said Yoda said it, so I tend to trust him because he's a bit of a Star Wars geek, but my notes say it was Mace Windu who said that in episode 1, The Phantom Menace. If you're a true Star Wars fan, you may not even watch that one. I don't know. Okay, last one. This is, are you an angel? Are you an angel? Is that Star Wars or is that scripture? Dean says it's found in the gospel according to Luke Skywalker. Very funny, Dean. Are you an angel? What do you think? Star Wars or scripture? Okay. Rachel Severn says both. Kristen with the CPU tag there says both. Laurie says yes. I'm not sure if that means both. And we've got Star Wars, totally scripture. Julie's, banking on this. All right, this is a tough one. A few of these are kind of on the line. Scripture, Don and Wendy, Colton says scripture. This is something that Anakin Skywalker says in episode 1 when he sees the princess. Are you an angel? So maybe both, Paul says. And he might be right. So thanks for playing along with me and having a little bit of fun there. The reason I want to talk about that is just because I think of this relationship between teacher and apprentice. And this is something we see in this passage. And this idea that, Jesus is commissioning these disciples. And I love what Paul said today about this hinge moment of moving from discipleship to apostleship. The idea of being the learner and then being kind of the sent ones and being sent out into the world. That's pretty amazing. I wonder if that's ever happened to you. Maybe in the comments there, can you just write, has there been a time when you've been handed responsibility, when something has been passed down to you, that you didn't have, and then someone gave you some responsibility or some authority? And I can think of some funny situations and some serious situations in my life where that's kind of happened. One funny story is with my kids and my father-in-law. And so one of the things that my father-in-law liked to do when the kids were little is he would get all the cousins, and there was lots of them together, and he would invite them to take on this responsibility of playing this really fun game around their property. And the game was called Lapu. And the game was something that all of the cousins, they looked forward to, because it was this opportunity, it was this authority that was being given over to them to do this exciting thing. And he described it as this exciting, fun game, something that everyone would want to do. And so all the people sit there, all the cousins sit there with smiles on their faces and anticipation, and they go and play this game called Lapu. And what Lapu stands for is Little Apple Pickup. And so he effectively convinced all of these kids to go and pick up all the tiny little crab apples and things that were dropping around the yard as a way to take on this responsibility. And they all did it willingly and happily because they thought, hey, this is the best thing ever. Grandpa's given us this opportunity to do this really fun thing. So we see things like that. See you later, Lennox. There's other things too. I remember when I first started one of my first jobs, and I'd love to hear some of your things here. If you've ever been handed responsibility or authority in some situation in your life, someone noticed parenting. That's a great one for sure. In one of my first jobs, I was working with a partner who didn't have a driver's license. And so I was like 16 years old, and I was driving the work trucks everywhere. And so I was handed the keys to these work vehicles. It felt pretty amazing to be kind of the guy who was able to drive all these work trucks. I had a work van that I took home with me every day. And this was over the summertime. And it was great. There was a sense of real responsibility and authority that I had in doing that. Now, it didn't always turn out so well, because I've got a few good stories of some damage that I did to 2 different vehicles in that job. But amazingly, my boss let me continue to drive the vehicles and be that person with that responsibility, even after, I'd messed up a couple of times. So pretty amazing stuff. He was a very foolish man, perhaps, but I still had that sense that I was given this responsibility. Another thing I can think of is, when I was a student at Heritage College, I did cleaning around the building. And even later, I also had a roommate that was kind of responsible to keep the building completely locked up and under control. And so, we had keys to get into this entire campus of Heritage. And so, when those keys are handed over to you, there is a little bit of a sense of awe, that you're being trusted with something that is pretty amazing. And so I know I was often in the building after hours. I remember there was a professor that was there at the time. I would play chess. He didn't know who was cleaning the building. And so I would make a chess move, and then he'd make a chess move the next day or whatever. And I'd come back, and there was kind of this mystery game of chess going on. I remember my roommate one time, I'm not recommending this, but, was able to get into the building after hours and take a picture sitting in the president's chair, kind of those kind of things. We're given those responsibilities. And very much, I don't know if you have other stories like that in your life. Maybe you got to work, the night shift, or you were locking up your store that you worked at. Maybe it was, getting those keys to your first car. Maybe it was holding that newborn baby and realizing that you've been given this incredible responsibility. But I think we've all had experiences like that. And that's kind of how I look at this experience when Jesus is, Kristen knows one of the people that used to organize all of the cleaning at Heritage. And yeah, I worked for Jim for a few years, and just really, he was great. Great working, great guy to work for. Oh, here Julie says she was once in charge of a bunch of forestry students with chainsaws for a week in the bush. That's amazing. Sharp objects, and you're the one that is, making sure no one gets hurt and everyone's able to do their jobs. That's a great example too, getting some chance to supervise or manage others. That's a huge step up in terms of responsibility. So this is a lot of what's going on here when Jesus commissions these disciples into their apostleship. And really, there was a high calling, because what he was saying is that, this is a defining moment in your lives. An incredible change is about to happen. And everything in your life is going to change, because from now on, you're going to put the kingdom, Jesus and his mission first above everything else. And as Paul preached through that passage, we see that clearly. He talks about the consequences of, even sometimes, going against family, going against friends who might, disagree or have conflict with this new structure of beliefs and this new motivation for the activity that we do in our lives. And really, Jesus says a few things. He says, first of all, you must acknowledge me publicly. That's something that you're going to do. And I don't know about all of you that are watching, but have you ever felt that pressure or responsibility to acknowledge Jesus publicly? And how does that sit with you? And how do you respond to those things? Secondly, Jesus said, you've got to give allegiance to me above everything else. Jesus's message, let me be really clear, Jesus's message was a message of peace. But it does say in that passage that he comes with a sword. And that's because Jesus knew that even his message of compassion and peace was not going to be accepted by everyone. That there would be family members, there would be friends, there would be people in our communities that didn't like the message of Jesus. And there was division that was going to result because of that. And so there is a sense here that Jesus is saying, hey, look, I bring a message of peace, but there will be conflict and there will be division. There was in Jesus's life, right? He did all kinds of incredible things to love people, heal people, perform amazing miracles. He fulfilled prophecy after prophecy. He had compassion on people. He showed humility to people, and still many people rejected him, including some of the wisest religious leaders on the planet who knew the scriptures. And so there's a sense here that there is division created when Jesus is the prominent person in our life. And so he prepares us for that. He also talks about taking up the cross. And so, we see that in the book of Luke. We see this idea of carrying our cross daily, following after Jesus. This is what apprenticeship is about. But the people of Galilee, the people in this time listening to this story, or these stories that Matthew's telling, they would have known the cross. There was a uprising before Jesus even arrived on earth. And there was about 3,000 people who revolted against Rome. Slaves who were trying to rise up against the Roman government. And the Roman government crushed that rebellion and crucified all of the people they captured. And those executions were just lined up along the roads. And so people would have seen those things. People would have heard those stories. I mean, those would have been passed on from generation to generation, from decade to decade. And people knew very well what it meant to carry a cross or to be threatened by, the idea of the cross. Paul also talked about this idea of losing our life. And, Jesus is very clear that, he calls us to something where we are pushing aside, our own desires to embrace the desires that he has given us. And I think he says, if you want a life that really satisfies and a life that really leads to human flourishing, then it takes a crucifixion to do that. It takes a dying to ourselves. Putting aside, maybe our own idea of right and wrong, putting aside our own, sometimes even our dreams and desires that aren't the same maybe as the dreams and desires that God has for us. Dallas Willard says, Jesus didn't die so I wouldn't have to. He died so that I could die with him. And I know that sounds macabre, but the idea there is that, we are being fully embraced by Jesus, our King. One of the things, Paul talked about today is this idea of a compassionate kingdom. And so, when I think about what Jesus has put in place for us, I think about this idea of a compassionate kingdom. I learned a new word this week. I learned the word collywobble. Do any of you know what the word collywobble means? I think I'm saying that right. It's kind of a British slang term. I want to see if anyone can put it up in the comments. But there was a YouTube video flying around where people were talking about some British slang, and one of the words there was collywobble. And when I heard Paul talk about this compassion of the gut, it reminded me of that word. And the word collywobble it kind of means butterflies in your stomach, or like I'm feeling a bit queasy, And so when Paul talked about this, it just reminded me of that word. And so, do we have the collywobbles, of compassion that are driving us forward? When Jesus, took on his kingship, he didn't do it necessarily to send his troops out to battle, to fight for his honor. We've seen lots of dynasties over the course of history where lives have been sacrificed for honor. We've seen dynasties where people have been sacrificed, or kingdoms or countries where thousands of people's lives have been sacrificed for land, that we could accumulate land or resources like oil or minerals or, whatever it might be at the time. We've seen thousands of people sent to war to fight, to kind of advance the fame of a king, the material collection and the fame and the renown of an earthly king. We've seen that happen in history. We read about it all the time. We see wars fought where thousands of people are sent out just to eliminate a people group or to capture a group of people, and how horrible that is. But we see these as motivations for conflict and for war and for the sending out of people to lose their lives. But in this case, it's something radically different. We have a kingdom. We have a king. But instead of coming to seek honor, instead of coming to seek, more land or more resources or more material goods, instead of, coming to, advance, his personal list of accomplishments that will be listed in the history books, instead of coming to, capture a people or to use or abuse a people, we see Jesus coming as a servant king. And it's just so radically different than everything else that we know as human beings. It's not the normal way that kingships work. And so, he comes as a servant king. He comes with that compassion from the gut, the whole mission of God to offer compassion. And true subjects of that kind of kingdom are people that have known and experienced the compassion of God and then turn around to live out that compassion in their lives. And so, as we do that, those who stand against that compassionate kingdom are people that will be in opposition to us. And Paul talked a bit about that idea of sheep among wolves. So, I think for us, this has been some hard stuff. I don't know about you, but as I've been reading through the book of Matthew, even as I preached a few weeks ago around the building of our lives on the rock versus the building of our lives on the sand, it became increasingly clear to me that, Jesus is calling us to something difficult. And I'm sure you figured that out by now. If you've been a part of the podcast, if you've been a part of the digital hubs, if you've been a part of the messages, or if you've just read through the text that we're reading in Matthew, you realize that Jesus is calling us to something exceptionally difficult. And I just want to leave you with one last kind of illustration or analogy, I think we have to make sure that we've embraced this idea as Jesus as a skilled mountain guide. And I think you've maybe heard me talk about this before a little bit. And if not, that's totally okay. Many of us, I think we tend to treat Jesus like a politician. So we treat him in this way that says, Jesus, if you can do some things for me, then I'll elect you into power. I'll accept you into this place of priority in my life. Maybe if you can help me with my financial stability, maybe you can help me deal with a sin or an addiction in my life. Maybe you can help me to, have a relationship that I'm looking for, or fix a relationship that is in trouble. Jesus, maybe you can help me with a mental health or a physical health issue. All of those things are things that Jesus does do. we see those examples, not all the time, but we do see healing. We do see Jesus bringing things into order in our lives. Jesus did come to demonstrate the kingdom, and we know that the kingdom is about peace and shalom and wholeness. God does enjoy giving good gifts to his children. We know that. We read that in scripture. So we see those things do happen, but Jesus's mission was so much bigger than, being pragmatic. It was so much bigger than just, solving a personal issue that I have. His issue was actually to come and to completely restore what he created, to bring the kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of earth together for eternity. And so there is just something more going on. And his view is just so much larger than our view. And so instead of seeing Jesus like a politician that we vote for, that we decide, okay, is he going to do enough good things for me? Then, the other thing that I can follow. We need to see Jesus like a skilled mountain guide, a Sherpa, and this idea that, as we're traveling up these, pathways that we've never been on before, as we're heading into these dangerous territories, as we're finding huge crevices in the rock and cold temperatures and high altitudes and just things that we're not equipped for, things that we're not prepared for. As we, face opposition of like a deadly snowstorm or, hungry animals or, other people that are trying to race there faster than us, we have to take a look at Jesus as a guide that knows so much better than we do where we're headed. And in that sense, I'm willing to put my life in the hands of a guide that knows the road better. It might be scary. It might be incredibly difficult. It might at times feel like too much for me, and I might not always do it perfectly. But that kind of trust, I think, is the trust that helps us to live out the authority of the kingdom. Anyway, I think it's time to wrap up. I would love to talk more. I want to talk about this power versus authority question that has really intrigued me in this passage. Maybe that's something that I don't know. I can ask Paul to mention during the podcast. But thanks for joining us. It's been great to be with you. I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend. Love for you to continue to think about what has challenged you in this series. And even if you didn't have a chance to put that in the comments here, would love for you to email it in. Let us know about it. And continue to really dig deep on this idea of being citizens of the King. Really appreciate all of you. Thanks for sticking with us over this strange and unusual time. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.